The grand vision of an energy-dominant Russia is rapidly dissolving into a nightmare of economic isolation and structural decay. While the Kremlin once believed it held the keys to global stability, the reality of 2026 reveals a nation struggling to breathe under its own weight. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of a superpower's influence, replaced by a chaotic scramble for survival. The very infrastructure designed to project power is now the very thing shackling the Russian economy to a failing past. In the following analysis, we explore the intricate details of this historical collapse and what it means for the global stage. The era of Russian energy hegemony has officially reached its expiration date due to a combination of Western legal pressure and Eastern opportunism. Major industry titans like Gazprom and Lukoil, once considered the invincible engines of the state, are now facing an existential crisis. These organizations are far more than mere commercial entities. They are the literal architects of Russia's transport and maritime logistics. By targeting these national champions, international sanctions have effectively paralyzed the entire Russian industrial movement. The European Union has definitively severed its ties, moving toward a future that completely excludes Russian fossil fuels. Current projections indicate that by late 2026, the arrival of Russian liquefied natural gas into European ports will be a thing of the past. Furthermore, the complete cessation of pipeline gas imports is scheduled for the final quarter of 2027, marking the end of an era. Gazprom's market presence in Europe, which once stood at a commanding 40%, is on a high-speed trajectory towards zero. This loss of the Western market represents a permanent shift in the global energy map that Moscow cannot simply reverse. Beyond the lost sales, the physical logistics of moving Russian resources have become a tangled web of technical failures. Ports like St. Petersburg and Ust-Luga, formerly bustling gateways to the world, have turned into stagnant maritime graveyards. The shadow fleet of tankers operating without international insurance or recognized flags now sits idle in these frozen waters. On the southern front, the Black Sea route has become a high-risk zone where commercial shipping is nearly impossible. Tankers departing from Novorossiysk must navigate not only physical threats, but a global market that views their cargo as toxic. Ukraine's strategic and asymmetric maritime operations have successfully neutralized the operational capacity of these vital Russian ports. Because storage facilities have reached their maximum capacity, Russia faces the terrifying prospect of having to shut down production. In the extreme temperatures of Siberia, closing a well is not a temporary measure, but often a permanent death sentence for the site. If the extraction valves are stopped, the geological pressure and freezing cold will ensure those resources never flow again. Moving inland, the railway networks that Putin hoped would save the economy are currently suffocating under immense pressure. The Trans-Siberian and BAM lines are no longer efficient corridors. They are scenes of endless logistical gridlock. Thousands of kilometers of rail lines are now occupied by stationary fuel tankers that have nowhere to deliver their contents. A staggering 30% of the nation's locomotive fleet is currently at risk of total mechanical failure. The absence of Western software updates and specialized spare parts has made modern maintenance an impossible task. Consequently, essential fuel intended for both the war effort and international exports is literally freezing on the tracks. This is not merely a series of unfortunate delays, it is the total systemic breakdown of Russia's internal circulation. Road transport is faring no better, with the gray routes through Central Asia and the Caucasus falling into complete disarray. Convoy after convoy of Russian trucks remain trapped at border crossings in Georgia and Kazakhstan due to rigorous sanction monitoring. At European customs points, Russian logistics companies are facing costs that have surged to 3 times their original rates. The desperation has reached a point where truck fleets are being cannibalized for parts just to keep a few vehicles operational. The maps that once showed a vast empire of trade routes now illustrate a country that is effectively
basically boxed in from all sides. Domestic propaganda continues to claim that the pivot to the east will compensate for all losses, but the data tells a different story. Recent trade statistics confirm that the total volume of commerce between Russia and China has actually begun to contract. For the first time in half a decade, Beijing's exports to Moscow have seen a significant annual decline of nearly 10%. This trend proves that Russia is becoming less attractive even to its supposed strategic partners as a reliable economic ally. Even if the power of Siberia pipeline operates at its absolute peak, it can only fulfill a fraction of the demand once met by Europe. Furthermore, Chinese negotiators have used Russia's desperation to drive prices down to the very edge of production costs. Instead of finding a supportive ally in the east, Moscow has found a ruthless trading partner that profits from Russian helplessness. The reality is that China is buying Russian crude at historically low prices, providing very little actual profit for the Kremlin. The situation on the Indian subcontinent is perhaps even more disastrous for Russia's long-term financial health. Under intense pressure from Washington, Indian refineries have started to reject shipments of Russian crude oil. This rejection has led to the creation of a ghost fleet of massive tankers wandering the oceans with nowhere to unload. Currently, millions of barrels of oil are sitting idle off the coasts of Oman and China, unable to find a legitimate buyer. Global financial institutions are now too terrified of secondary U.S. sanctions to process payments for these Russian energy products. As a result, Russia is forced to offer humiliating discounts of $30 per barrel just to tempt any potential purchaser. Despite these massive price cuts, buyers in India and China continue to demand even deeper concessions, knowing Moscow has no choice. Russia has transitioned from a global energy leader to a desperate beggar in the international marketplace. Even when a sale is finally agreed upon, the difficulty of transferring the currency often makes the transaction a net loss.
Data from late 2025 shows that Indian imports of Russian oil have plummeted to their lowest levels in several years. With the European market closed and the Asian market turning hostile, Russia is effectively under an economic siege. This loss of revenue has created a massive hole in the national budget that mathematics simply cannot ignore. The Russian Ministry of Finance built its 2026 budget on the assumption that oil would stay at $59 per barrel. In reality, the price of Urals crude has crashed to nearly $39, leaving a massive $20 deficit per barrel. This shortfall translates into hundreds of millions of dollars of lost state revenue every single day of the year. Consequently, the national treasury is being drained at an alarming rate, with energy revenues falling by nearly half. Prominent economists now warn that a total fiscal collapse is no longer a possibility, but a mathematical certainty. The projected budget deficit is expected to nearly double, cutting off the cash flow required to sustain the Kremlin's ambitions. However, the financial loss is only one part of a much larger crisis involving the physical decay of production assets. Many of the aging oil fields in Siberia are reaching a point of natural depletion and technical exhaustion. With prices hovering around $40, it is no longer profitable to maintain the complex infrastructure needed for extraction. Shutting down these wells in the Arctic environment is a high-risk gamble that usually ends in permanent damage. Experts warn that issues like wax buildup and loss of reservoir pressure could destroy these fields for future generations. Drone attacks and international sanctions have intensified these risks, pushing the energy sector toward a point of no return. The withdrawal of global giants like Halliburton has left Russia without the sophisticated technology required for modern drilling. Local companies like Gazprom Neft are reporting critical shortages of hundreds of essential specialized components. Infrastructure projects have been abandoned, and the industry is surviving by stripping parts from older machinery. Without access to Western real-time data analysis and software updates, the efficiency of Russian production is collapsing.
This technological regression is effectively neutralizing the energy card that Putin once played with such confidence. The resulting economic shock is now traveling through the system, beginning to unravel the very fabric of Russian society. International legal battles, such as the massive arbitration case filed by Uniper, are adding billions in potential liabilities. Private entities like Lukoil are finding themselves strangled by secondary sanctions that target their core export capacities. The leadership of these companies is now forced to plead with the Kremlin for tax relief and state bailouts just to stay afloat. It is a profound irony that the companies that once funded the state are now becoming a financial burden upon it. Lukoil is being systematically purged from the international market, losing its refineries and assets in Italy and Bulgaria. This forced contraction is turning global corporate giants into small, localized players with no room for growth. The year 2025 will be remembered as the moment the Russian business environment entered a terminal death spiral. Statistics reveal that for every new company founded, nearly 2 others are closing their doors permanently. In major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, the once vibrant commercial activity has largely evaporated. This economic devastation signals the end of the Russian middle class and any hope for industrial modernization. The drastic reduction in transportation contracts is clear proof that factories can no longer maintain their equipment. The government's narrative that a war economy creates wealth has been exposed as a hollow and dangerous lie. Personal bankruptcies have surged, with over 500,000 citizens officially losing everything they own. This financial desperation has triggered a widespread psychological crisis across the entire Russian population. The demand for antidepressants has reached record-breaking levels, showing the deep mental scars of this prolonged uncertainty. As people lose their livelihoods, they are also losing their hope for a stable and predictable future. Basic survival has become a daily struggle, with the prices of essential goods like baby formula becoming unaffordable. A 44% increase in the cost of infant nutrition has forced families to rely on desperate barter systems. When a society can no longer afford to feed its youngest members, it has reached a state of fundamental collapse. The state continues to prioritize the war machine, draining resources from the civilian economy to feed the military-industrial complex. Young people are being funneled into factory labor and military service, sacrificing their education for the state's survival. Modern education in law and economics is being restricted in favor of training a generation of industrial laborers. Putin's long-standing promise of national stability has been replaced by a reality of total social and economic chaos. The logistical failures are now visible on the empty shelves of supermarkets in every major city in Russia. The contraction of the energy sector has caused a domino effect, paralyzing the service industries and manufacturing. Sanctions on Gazprom Bank have locked Russian assets within the country, preventing any attempt at global financial movement. This internal pressure has triggered a massive flight of capital as those with means try to save what they can. Even the most powerful members of the Russian elite are no longer safe from the reach of international law. Igor Sechin, the once feared head of Rosneft, has seen his global influence and personal fortune completely neutralized. Being placed on the U.S. sanctions list has turned these formerly powerful men into prisoners within their own borders. The collapse of Rosneft's profit margins has wiped out the international connections that Sechin spent decades building. Other oligarchs, like Suleiman Kerimov, are facing the total freezing of their assets held in Western trusts and banks. The lifestyle of the Russian elite, once defined by global mobility and luxury, has been permanently restricted. Vaget Alekperov of Lukoil has become a primary target for international sanctions, forcing him to liquidate his foreign holdings. These men are now watching as their vast energy-based fortunes are systematically dismantled by the West.
Desperate bureaucrats and wealthy elites are searching for any possible route to move their wealth to places like Dubai. Russia's geopolitical isolation has also forced it to lean more heavily on its neighbor, Belarus, with disastrous results.
Moscow is attempting to extract value from the Belarusian economy to cover its own internal financial failures. However, the economy in Minsk is also failing, burdened by a massive trade deficit and its own set of sanctions. On the borders, NATO is implementing high-tech defensive measures that render Russia's traditional military threats obsolete. The encirclement that the Kremlin has feared for 30 years is finally happening, but it was triggered by their own hand. We are witnessing the official end of the energy superpower doctrine that defined Russian policy for 3 decades. The attempt to use oil and gas as a tool for political blackmail has backfired, becoming a trap for Moscow itself. Russia is now effectively a prisoner of its own natural resources, which it can neither sell nor properly maintain. The National Welfare Fund, once a massive rainy day reserve, is disappearing into the void of war and falling oil prices. At the current rate of depletion, analysts expect Russia's financial reserves to be completely exhausted in 18 months. Without these funds, the Kremlin will be unable to pay for its war or maintain basic social order at home. Perhaps the most significant defeat is Russia's total transformation into a junior partner and resource colony for China. Beijing is not acting out of friendship, but is exploiting Moscow's desperation to secure energy at the lowest possible cost. Russia has lost its seat at the table of global powers and has been relegated to the status of a regional fuel station. This is the ultimate failure of Putin's diplomacy, a surrender of national sovereignty in exchange for short-term survival. The social contract between the Kremlin and the Russian people, based on prosperity and order, has been permanently broken. What remains of the energy empire is a landscape of rusting pipes, idle ships, and broken financial promises. The future of the Russian state is now buried beneath the rubble of its failed energy and military policies. By attempting to freeze the world, Vladimir Putin has succeeded only in plunging his own nation into a long, dark winter. The bankruptcy of Gazprom and the decline of Lukoil are the funeral bells for the Russian economy as we knew it. The heavy price of this conflict is being paid by Russian mothers in their kitchens and by children who lack basic nutrition. Every door to the west has been double-locked, and every pathway to the east has become a predatory trap. The energy weapon has exploded in the hands of the user, leaving the Kremlin with nothing but ashes and debt. The logistical spine of the country has been shattered beyond any immediate hope of repair or reconstruction. With tankers trapped in the ocean and trains stalled in the wilderness, the movement of goods has ceased to function. Putin's fortress of logistics is collapsing under the weight of the very complexity he tried to use against the world. An empire does not end when it runs out of soldiers, but when its people lose their belief in a better tomorrow. Today, the Russian Federation is a nation devoid of both financial capital and the hope required for a recovery. The war has finally come home, and its primary delivery is a total and irreversible national bankruptcy. We must consider the long-term implications of a nuclear state facing such a rapid and uncontrolled economic descent. As the energy revenues continue to dry up, the internal stability of the Kremlin becomes increasingly fragile. The world is watching the fall of a giant that forgot its strength was built on the very global system it tried to destroy. There is no easy exit from this situation, and the damage to the Russian infrastructure will take generations to heal. The lesson of this collapse is clear. No nation, regardless of its resources, can survive in total opposition to the global community. As the oil wells freeze and the bank accounts empty, the era of the Kremlin's energy blackmail is officially over. Every decision made in Moscow over the last few years has led directly to this moment of absolute economic isolation. The once mighty Russian bear is now caught in a trap of its own making, with no clear way to escape. We are seeing the map of the world being redrawn as Russia's influence evaporates from Europe and Asia alike. This is the true cost of seeking power through destruction rather than through cooperation and development. The stories of empty shelves and bankrupt families are the real headlines of this era, far beyond the battlefield reports. As we move further into 2026, the speed of this decline is only expected to accelerate as reserves run dry. The international community must now prepare for the aftermath of a Russia that can no longer sustain itself. This has been an in-depth look at the structural failure of a nation that bet its entire future on a single failing card. The consequences of these events will be felt for decades to come, changing the way we think about energy security. Thank you for your time and for engaging with this critical look at the current state of global and Russian affairs. We value your perspective on these complex geopolitical shifts that are currently unfolding before our eyes. Please feel free to contribute your own thoughts and observations in the discussion section below. To ensure you stay informed on the latest strategic breakdowns and global trends, consider following our future updates. Activating your notifications will keep you at the forefront of the most important analyses in this changing world. We appreciate your continued support and look forward to bringing you more comprehensive reports soon. Until our next analysis, stay curious and stay informed about the forces shaping our collective future.